I never meant to invite you. We don't want you here." Those were the exact words my only brother Jake spat at me on what should have been one of the happiest days of his life. My only brother's wedding, a once-in-a-lifetime family event, and I learned once again that I was excluded. My name is Emily. I've always been the ghost in my own family, the one they conveniently forget to invite to birthdays, graduations, or even simple Sunday barbecues. I'd spent my entire childhood and most of my 20s trying to convince myself that it was just an oversight. Maybe they forgot. Maybe they just assumed I'd show up anyway. Maybe they just didn't know how to reach me despite my number being the same for over a decade. Last year, my parents forgot my birthday. Not even a call, just a one-line text from my mother, "Happy birthday, Emily." No emoji, no warmth, nothing that even hinted at a mother-daughter bond. Just cold clinical words that felt like a checklist item she was glad to cross off. The only person who ever made me feel seen was Aunt Helen. She'd call every few weeks just to check in. Sometimes she'd ask me things no one else ever bothered to. Are you happy? Are you lonely? She was the only one who seemed genuinely proud when I left our small town and built a life for myself in digital marketing. To my parents and brother, my work was just playing with computers. They never asked how I managed to buy my own condo by 28 or why I always had my vacations planned months in advance. They never cared, they never asked, and I never bragged. I just quietly moved on. Then last month, an ivory envelope arrived in my mailbox. My name, written in sweeping gold calligraphy, practically shimmered in the afternoon sun. An invitation to Jake's wedding. I held it in my hands for a long moment, my pulse quickening. Was this a mistake? Had I somehow stumbled back into their world, unnoticed and unappreciated as always, but at least acknowledged? The card inside was heavy thick with glossy print and gold accents. It read, "You are cordially invited to the wedding of Jake Mitchell and Lauren Hill." The date was June 15th, with the ceremony set in an upscale garden and a lakeside reception to follow. My hands shook. This had to be a turning point, an olive branch. The one thing I'd wanted for so long to be included, to be seen. I poured myself into preparations. Weeks were spent hunting down the perfect dress. I booked a salon appointment for my hair, nails, even a spa day to unwind before the event. I found a stunning glass sculpture, a custom piece with swirls of teal and gold as a wedding gift, knowing it would match Jake's beach-themed apartment. It cost more than I'd usually spend, but this was my chance. My opportunity to finally be part of my family's moments, not just the shadow hovering on the sidelines. The day before the wedding, I decided to visit Aunt Helen. She lived about an hour away in a cozy little cottage by the river. I wanted to show her the gift, share my excitement, maybe even imagine for a moment that I had a family that actually cared. When I arrived, she opened the door with a small, tight smile. There was a strange flicker in her eyes, a hint of something I couldn't quite place. Guilt, maybe sadness. I ignored it too high on the anticipation of finally belonging to notice. "I can't believe tomorrow is the big day," I said as I hugged her. "Jake's wedding, can you believe it? I'm actually invited this time." Aunt Helen hesitated, her hands fumbling with the lace on her sleeves. "Emily, why don't you sit down for a minute? Let me make you some tea." The living room felt different that day. Warmer, but also tense, like the air itself held its breath. I spotted a thick, leather-bound photo album on the coffee table. It wasn't there the last time I visited. Curiosity got the best of me as she disappeared into the kitchen and I flipped it open. Smiling faces, beautiful floral arrangements, everyone dressed to the nines. My parents, my brother, his fiancée Lauren. Champagne glasses, clinking hugs, and family toasts. My breath caught in my throat as I flipped through the pages. Aunt Helen returned with the tea, her hands trembling slightly. She set the tray down and sank into the armchair across from me, watching my face closely. What is this?" I managed to choke out my fingers frozen on a photo of my brother grinning as he cut a cake. A 3-tiered floral masterpiece, clearly the centerpiece of a lavish wedding. "It's Jake's wedding," she whispered, not meeting my eyes. "It was last weekend." I felt my pulse roaring in my ears. The room seemed to tilt. "Last weekend. But the invitation says June 15th. That's tomorrow. Aunt Helen closed her eyes for a long moment like someone bracing for a storm. They sent you a fake date, Emily. They didn't want you there. I tried to tell them it was cruel, but they wouldn't listen. I'm so sorry. The world seemed to shrink around me, my vision tunneling on that single photo of my brother. The brother I had planned to celebrate the family I had so desperately wanted to be a part of. They had deliberately given me the wrong date. They had lied to keep me away. I closed the album and set it back on the table, my hands trembling, a sick, hollow ache spreading in my chest. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't speak. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then Aunt Helen reached across the table, her warm, wrinkled hand covering mine. I'm here for you, Emily. Always. And that was when something inside me snapped. The girl who had always stayed quiet, who had always hoped for a place at the family table, died in that moment. And from her ashes, a new version of me began to rise. Thank you, I whispered, pulling my hand away as I stood. My mind was already racing plans, forming connections, clicking into place. Thank you for always being honest with me, Aunt Helen. As I walked out of her house, the summer sun burned hotter, sharper, like it too was angry on my behalf. They thought they had cut me out of their lives for good. They had no idea what was coming next. I drove home in a daze, my mind replaying that moment at Aunt Helen's house over and over. The sight of those photos, my family, my brother, the people who were supposed to be my own flesh and blood celebrating without me. They had raised their glasses, danced under fairy lights, and toasted to a future they had explicitly chosen to exclude me from. The same people who had sent me a fake invitation to keep me away. When I pulled into my driveway, the weight of it all hit me. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white against the leather, my breaths coming in sharp, ragged gasps. They had cut me out, erased me like a typo in a family memo. I stumbled into my condo, the cool, quiet space feeling suddenly too large, too empty. I sank onto the couch, the air in the room heavy and suffocating. My phone buzzed in my purse, the screen flashing with a text from Aunt Helen. I'm so sorry, Emily. I should have told you sooner. Call me if you need to talk. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, letting the silence swallow me whole. But then something snapped. I had been silent for too long. I had been the forgotten daughter, the overlooked sister, the ghost in their lives. I wasn't going to let them pretend I didn't exist anymore. I dialed my mother's number before I could second-guess myself. It rang 3 times before she picked up, her voice clipped and distracted. Hello? Why my voice was sharp, my throat tight with the effort of keeping my emotions in check. Why did you lie to me? There was a pause, a brief, uncomfortable silence that told me she knew exactly what I was talking about. Emily, I don't know what you mean. Don't I? Snapped, my pulse spiking. Don't lie to me. Aunt Helen showed me the wedding photos. I know it happened last weekend. I know you deliberately sent me the wrong date. Another silence, this one longer, heavier. I could almost hear her mind racing, scrambling to piece together a defense. Emily, she said finally, her voice colder, now sharper. We just thought it would be easier, less drama. You have a tendency to make things awkward, and we didn't want to deal with that on Jake's big day. I felt a bitter laugh rise in my throat. Easier, of course. Cutting me out was easier than facing the discomfort of my presence. Easier than acknowledging the years of neglect, the forgotten birthdays, the countless times I'd been the afterthought. Easier for who I bit out. For you. For Jake. You couldn't even give me the courtesy of a real invitation. You had to lie to me to deceive me. Emily, please, she sighed, exasperated. You always overreact. This is exactly why we didn't tell you. You're too sensitive. You take everything so personally. I felt my heart harden, a cold, unbreakable shell forming around it. This wasn't just about the wedding. This was about every slight, every insult, every time they had made me feel small, invisible. This was the final, undeniable proof that I had never truly been part of their world. Right, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous calm. I'm the problem. I'm the one who's always been too much, too emotional, too needy. Well, you've made it clear where I stand. You've made it clear what I mean to this family. Nothing. Emily, don't be dramatic. She snapped, her tone sharpening. This isn't about you. It was just a wedding. Jake didn't want to deal with the tension, and frankly, neither did we. Of course, I whispered, my throat tight, my hands trembling. Of course, it's never about me. It never has been. I hung up before she could respond, the finality of it ringing in my ears like a gunshot. For a long moment, I just sat there staring at the wall, the hum of my refrigerator, the only sound in the room. I felt hollow, the echo of my mother's words bouncing around my mind. Too sensitive, too emotional. Always the problem, but then slowly, that hollow space began to fill. Not with sadness, not with despair, but with something sharper, something colder. I had always been the one trying to fit into their world, bending myself into smaller and smaller shapes, hoping they would finally see me, finally accept me. Not anymore. They had erased me. Now I would return the favor. I pulled my laptop onto my lap, my fingers moving with a newfound precision as I logged into my financial accounts, pulled up property records, and opened my business portfolio. They thought they knew me, thought they could cut me out without consequence. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I had quietly built a life for myself, a life they had never bothered to ask about, never cared to understand. I had invested wisely, saved carefully, and expanded my business beyond anything they could imagine. I wasn't just the forgotten daughter. I was a force they had overlooked for too long. As I typed my mind sharp and clear for the first time in years, I realized something profound. They had cut me out of their family. Now I was going to cut them out of my life. For good. That night, I barely slept. My mind raced with every slight, every insult, every whispered dismissal my family had thrown my way over the years. The quiet, constant neglect that had become the backdrop of my life. I had always told myself that I didn't need their approval, that I was better off without their toxic judgment. But this was a new kind of betrayal. This was calculated, deliberate. They hadn't just forgotten me, they had actively excluded me, deceived me, and then had the audacity to call me dramatic for being hurt. By morning, my anger had crystallized into something sharper. I sat at my kitchen table, the harsh morning light cutting through the blinds, casting long, sharp shadows across my laptop. I needed a plan. Not just for revenge, but for closure. For freedom. First, I made a list. I needed to cut every tie, sever every remaining thread that connected me to their world. Financial, emotional, physical. If they wanted me out of their lives, I'd grant them that wish. Permanently. I logged into my business accounts, pulling up the financial records I had meticulously maintained over the years. I had done well for myself, even if my family had never bothered to notice. My digital marketing agency, which they dismissed as messing with computers, had grown into a lucrative business with clients across the country. I had diversified my income streams, invested in real estate, and quietly amassed a portfolio that included 3 rental properties. My parents had no idea that I was the one who had been anonymously paying their mortgage for the past 2 years. They had no clue that the mysterious benefactor who had covered the roof repairs and plumbing fixes at their lake cottage was their own forgotten daughter. I pulled up the account I had used to funnel those payments. With a few swift keystrokes, I canceled the automatic transfers, freezing the account. Their next mortgage payment would be due in 3 weeks. Let them figure that one out. Next, I opened my personal email, scrolling through years of correspondence, ignoring the one-line holiday greetings and the generic birthday wishes from my mother. I found the emails from my accountant, confirming the annual property tax payments I had quietly covered for my parents, the emergency medical bills I had cleared for my brother when he broke his wrist snowboarding last year. I made a few quick calls, canceling every last one of those supports. I blocked their numbers, deleted their emails, and erased every trace of financial aid I had ever provided. If they wanted to act like I didn't exist, I would make that their reality. As I worked, a sense of calm washed over me. It felt good, freeing to finally cut those strings, to finally stop playing the role of the invisible support system they never appreciated. I was done being their safety net. With the financial side handled, I turned my attention to the emotional ties. I had always kept a box of family photos, old letters, and birthday cards tucked away in my closet, a sentimental archive of moments I had clung to in the naive hope that someday my family would remember me, would love me the way families are supposed to. I pulled the box down, dust swirling in the morning light as I flipped through the photos, blurry snapshots of long-forgotten vacations, forced smiles at holiday dinners, my brother's graduation, my parents' anniversary party. I had been there, a shadow in the background, always present but never truly included. I packed the entire box into a garbage bag, the brittle paper crackling like dry leaves as I knotted the bag and hauled it down to the dumpster. I watched it disappear into the dark, musty depths of the metal bin, feeling a strange sense of relief, like I had just shed a layer of dead skin. With the remnants of my past purged, I turned my focus to the final, most critical part of my plan, my parents' lake cottage. I had quietly purchased the property years ago, bailing them out when they fell behind on payments. They had never updated the deed, never bothered to ask whose name was on the title. Legally, the cottage was mine, and now I would make sure they knew it. I called my attorney Susan, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who had guided me through my first property purchase and had handled every legal matter for my business since. She picked up on the second ring, her voice brisk and professional. "Susan, it's Emily. I need to initiate an eviction." There was a brief pause. I could almost hear her mind shifting gears, her years of legal training kicking in. "All right," she said, her tone carefully neutral. "Whose property are we talking about?" "The lake cottage," I replied, my voice steady. "I own it. My parents have been living there rent-free for years. It's time for them to leave." She didn't question. Me didn't ask why. That's what I liked about Susan. She respected boundaries, understood the value of quiet efficiency. "I'll draft the eviction notice," she said. "Do you want me to handle the delivery, or would you prefer to do it yourself?" "Send it to me," I said, my jaw tightening. "I want them to know this came from me." "Understood," she replied. "I'll have it on your desk by tomorrow." I hung up, my heart pounding, the adrenaline buzzing in my veins. They had erased me. They had lied to me, cut me out, and dismissed me as a burden. They had taken my silence for weakness, my patience for passivity. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. The next morning, Susan emailed me the eviction notice. It was a cold, formal document, every line dripping with legal finality. I printed it, the paper warm and crisp in my hands, the black ink stark against the white background. It felt like holding the first step of my freedom. I slipped the notice into a manila envelope and sealed it carefully, my hands steady, my resolve sharper than ever. This wasn't about revenge. This was about reclaiming the space I had allowed my family to occupy in my mind, my heart, and my life for far too long. I drove out to the lake cottage that afternoon. The air was humid, the sky a dull gray, the kind of oppressive, sticky heat that made the world feel smaller, tighter. As I pulled into the gravel driveway, my parents' cars sat parked side by side, their old SUV and my father's dented pickup rusting quietly in the thick, wet air. I stepped out, the gravel crunching beneath my heels, the distant hum of cicadas buzzing in the trees. The cottage looked the same as it always had, small, weathered, but comfortable. I had poured tens of thousands of dollars into this place, fixing the roof, upgrading the plumbing, even reinforcing the aging foundation. They never knew. I walked up the creaking wooden steps, my heels clacking against the warped boards. I could hear my mother's voice drifting through the open kitchen window, her high, sharp tone slicing through the thick summer air. My father's deeper, rumbling responses followed the faint clink of dishes punctuating their conversation. I paused at the door, my heart thundering in my chest. For a brief, fleeting moment, a tiny, wounded part of me hoped they might be talking about me. That maybe, just maybe, they regretted their choices, that they felt some small, aching guilt for cutting me out of their lives so completely. But then I heard my mother's laugh, sharp and dismissive, followed by my father's low chuckle. The same cold, casual cruelty I had endured for years, the same bitter tone I had ignored, excused, rationalized. I knocked 3 sharp raps on the old peeling wood. The conversation inside cut off abruptly, the clinking of dishes falling silent. My mother opened the door, her expression shifting from confusion to mild irritation as she took me in her eyes, flicking to the envelope in my hand. "Emily," she said, her tone carefully neutral, her lips pressing into a thin, unwelcoming line. "What are you doing here?" I held her gaze, my own face a carefully composed mask. "I have something for you," I said, holding out the envelope. She hesitated, her eyes narrowing slightly, a flicker of suspicion flashing across her face. She reached for the envelope slowly, her manicured nails clicking against the paper as she took it from my outstretched hand. "What is this?" she asked, her tone sharp, almost accusatory. "Open it," I replied, stepping back, my heels sinking slightly into the soft, damp wood of the porch. She glanced down at the envelope, her brow furrowing as she ripped it open, the sound of tearing paper loud in the stillness of the afternoon. Her eyes scanned the first few lines, and I watched as the color drained from her face, her fingers tightening around the edge of the document. What is this?" she stammered, her voice trembling, her eyes darting up to meet mine, wide and wild with confusion and panic. "It's an eviction notice," I said, my tone steady, my heart pounding so loudly I could feel it in my teeth. "You have 30 days to vacate the property." She took a step back, her free hand flying to her chest, her eyes filling with a mixture of disbelief and growing anger. You can't do this, Emily. This is our home." "No," I replied, my voice cold firm. "It's my property. I own it. I've owned it for years. I just let you live here because I thought foolishly that we were still family." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, her carefully composed facade cracking, the real fear seeping through the thin veneer of control she had clung to for so long. At that moment, my father appeared behind her, his broad, calloused hand coming to rest on her shoulder as he leaned around to peer at the paper in her trembling grasp. His eyes moved slowly over the words, his weathered face darkening with each line. "Emily, what the hell is this?" he growled, his voice thick with disbelief, his eyes narrowing as he looked at me, his daughter as if seeing me for the first time. "It's legal paperwork," I said, my voice as sharp as the summer air cutting through the thick, humid silence. "You have 30 days to leave. After that, you're trespassing." My mother's hand dropped to her side, the paper fluttering weakly against her thigh, her lips trembling, her eyes filling with a mixture of shock and rage. "You ungrateful little," she began, but I cut her off, my voice rising sharp and unyielding. "No," I snapped, my voice echoing off the old wooden walls of the cottage. "You don't get to call me that. Not anymore. You made your choice when you cut me out, when you lied to me, when you sent me a fake invitation to my own brother's wedding. You made it clear that I'm not family, so now I'm just your landlord, and I'm done letting you live here rent-free." I took a step back, my heels sinking into the soft, spongy wood of the porch, my heart thundering in my chest, my breaths coming fast and shallow, the adrenaline burning through my veins. For a long, tense moment, no one spoke. My parents just stood there, frozen in the doorway, their faces pale, their eyes wide, their mouths open but silent. I turned my footsteps sharp and precise as I strode back to my car, the gravel crunching beneath my heels. As I climbed into the driver's seat, I glanced back at the cottage, at the place that had once been a symbol of family, of warmth, of belonging. Not anymore. I started the engine, the familiar rumble of the motor, a comforting, steady presence beneath me, and pulled out of the driveway without a backward glance. They wanted me gone. Now they would learn what life was like without me. The days after delivering the eviction notice were a strange mix of calm and chaos. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, a freedom I hadn't known I needed. I had cut the final thread tethering me to the people who had treated me like a ghost in my own family. Yet the fallout came quickly. It started with the phone calls. First, my mother. I let it ring, the shrill tone echoing through my condo, vibrating against the hardwood floors. She called 3 times in a row, each call lasting longer than the last, her desperation evident in the persistent buzzing. I watched the screen light up, my mother's name flashing like a warning sign. I let it go to voicemail every time. Next, my father. His calls were fewer but longer, his messages gruffer, the tone more angry than pleading. Emily, pick up. We need to talk. This isn't right. One of his voicemails started, his voice thick with barely contained fury. You don't just throw your parents out like this. You can't just turn your back on family. Family. The word echoed bitterly in my mind. They had thrown that word around like a shield, using it to justify their neglect, their cruelty, their endless dismissals. Now that I was the one drawing boundaries, it felt like they were choking on the same lines they had used to cut me out. When I didn't respond to their calls, the messages turned darker. My brother Jake finally reached out, breaking his long silence with a short, cutting text. What the hell is wrong with you? Are you trying to ruin Mom and Dad's lives? I almost laughed when I read it, the irony sharp and bitter on my tongue. The same brother who had erased me from his wedding, the same brother who had chosen to cut me out of his life, now suddenly cared about family loyalty. I typed a short, blunt reply before I could second-guess myself. You did that, not me. I hit send, my fingers trembling only slightly, my heart steady and cold. Then came the emails. My father sent me a long, rambling message, half apology, half scolding, dripping with self-righteousness and thinly veiled threats. He talked about all the sacrifices they had made for me, the countless hours they had invested in raising me, the financial support they had supposedly provided over the years. I deleted it without a second thought. The final message, the one that truly made my blood run cold, came from my mother. She had always been the one with the sharpest tongue, the one who could cut you down with a single dismissive glance. Her email was a masterpiece of passive aggression, laced with thinly veiled guilt trips and emotional manipulation. I can't believe you would do this to us, Emily. After everything we've done for you. After all the years we supported you, put a roof over your head, raised you. This is how you repay us, by throwing us out like garbage. She had attached a photo to the email, a picture of the lake cottage taken on a bright summer day, the sun glinting off the calm water, the trees swaying gently in the breeze. It was the perfect postcard image, a snapshot of the family life they had always wanted to project, the lie they had carefully curated over the years. I stared at the photo for a long moment, the anger simmering beneath my skin, my jaw tightening. Then I hit delete, the image disappearing from my screen, the digital ghost of a life I no longer wanted, haunting me for a second before vanishing into the void. Days passed. The calls continued, the messages piling up like dead leaves on a forgotten path. I ignored them all, my resolve hardening with each ignored ring, each unanswered email. Then one evening, my phone lit up with a call from Aunt Helen. I hesitated for a moment before answering, my heart thudding in my chest. Emily. Her voice was soft, hesitant, a stark contrast to the angry, demanding messages I had been ignoring. Hey, Aunt Helen, I replied, sinking into the plush corner of my couch, the leather cool against my bare legs. I just wanted to check on you, she said, her tone careful, like someone approaching a skittish animal. I heard about everything. Of course she had. My parents had probably called her desperate for an ally, hoping she would convince me to change my mind, to undo the damage they had brought upon themselves. I'm fine, I said, my voice steady, my grip on the phone tightening slightly. I'm finally doing what I should have done a long time ago. She was quiet for a moment, the soft crackle of the phone line the only sound between us. I understand, she said finally, her voice tinged with a sadness I hadn't expected. I just want you to know that I'm here if you need someone to talk to. I've always been on your side, Emily. You know that, right? I do. I whispered, my throat tightening, the sharp, bitter edge of old wounds cutting deeper than I had anticipated. I won't try to change your mind, she continued, her tone gentle but firm. But just be careful. This kind of thing can have consequences. People can get desperate when they feel cornered. I swallowed hard, the weight of her words settling heavily in my chest. I know, I said, my voice low, my mind already racing with the implications, the potential fallout I hadn't fully considered in my rage and resolve. But I'm done being their doormat. I'm done being the forgotten daughter. We talked for a few more minutes, her voice a quiet comfort in the storm I had unleashed before I finally said goodbye, and hung up my heart heavier than it had been in days. As I set my phone down, the screen darkening the room, falling back into silence, I felt a flicker of doubt, a tiny, insidious whisper at the back of my mind. Had I gone too far? But then I remembered the wedding photos, the fake invitation, the years of being overlooked, dismissed, ignored. No, I hadn't gone far enough. The day of the eviction came faster than I had expected. 30 days had passed in a blur each morning, marked by ignored calls each evening, punctuated by bitter texts from my brother. My parents had tried every tactic in the book: guilt, anger, pleading. They had even roped in old family friends, distant cousins, and long-lost aunts to try and sway me. I ignored them all. On the morning of the eviction, I dressed carefully. Black slacks, a crisp white blouse, my hair pulled back into a tight, no-nonsense ponytail. I needed to project calm control and absolute authority. I needed to be the version of myself they had never taken seriously, the woman they had underestimated for so long. Susan, my attorney, met me in the parking lot of the county courthouse. She was a sharp, efficient woman with an iron will and a reputation for being utterly ruthless when necessary. She gave me a firm nod as I approached, her eyes scanning my face for any sign of hesitation. "You ready?" she asked, her tone brisk, her gaze steady. I took a deep breath, the morning air cool and sharp in my lungs. More than ready. We made our way to the lake cottage, the drive eerily quiet, the summer leaves rustling softly in the breeze, the sky a muted, overcast gray. It felt like the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for the final act of this long, bitter drama. As we pulled into the gravel driveway, my parents' cars were already there, parked haphazardly, the old SUV's front bumper dented from years of careless use. I could see the curtains in the front window twitch as my mother peered out, her pale face framed by the thin yellowing lace she had stubbornly refused to replace for decades. Susan and I stepped out, the gravel crunching under our feet, the air heavy with the scent of pine and lake water. My heart pounded in my chest, the familiar ache of old wounds flaring as I approached the front door, Susan's heels clicking sharply beside me. My father opened the door before I could knock, his broad frame filling the narrow doorway, his eyes dark, his jaw set in a hard, unyielding line. Behind him, I caught a glimpse of my mother, her thin, wiry frame hunched over her eyes, red-rimmed, her hands twisting nervously at the hem of her faded floral blouse. "Emily," my father said, his voice a low warning rumble. "You don't have to do this." I met his gaze, my own expression cold, my spine straight. "Yes, I do." Susan stepped forward, her tone crisp and professional as she handed my father a thick stack of papers. Her fingers steady, her eyes sharp. "This is the final eviction notice," she said, her voice cutting through the thick, humid air like a blade. "You have until the end of the day to vacate the property. Any remaining belongings will be considered abandoned and will be disposed of accordingly." My father's face darkened, his fists clenching at his sides, his jaw working as he struggled to contain his rising anger. "You can't do this," he growled, his eyes locking onto mine, the unspoken challenge hanging in the air between us. "We're your parents. This is our home." "No," I said, my voice cold, unyielding. "It's my property. I've paid for it, maintained it, and covered your bills for years. You chose to cut me out. You made it clear I'm not family. Now I'm just your landlord, and I'm done letting you live here rent-free." My mother made a small, wounded sound behind him, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes filling with fresh tears, her thin shoulders trembling. "Emily, please," she whispered, her voice breaking, the words raw and desperate. "We're your family. We raised you. We took care of you. How can you do this to us?" I felt a sharp, bitter twist in my chest, the old, familiar ache of wanting to be seen, to be valued, to be loved. But I pushed it down, crushed it beneath the weight of years of neglect, of betrayal, of silence. "You didn't raise me," I said, my voice cold, my words cutting. "You tolerated me. You ignored me. You dismissed me. You chose your perfect son over your invisible daughter every single time. You erased me from your lives, and now I'm doing the same to you." My father's face twisted, the anger finally breaking through his thin veneer of control, his voice rising, his fists clenching. "You're going to regret this." He spat his words thick with fury, his eyes dark with a hatred I hadn't realized he was capable of. "You're going to end up alone, just like you deserve." I felt a small, bitter smile curl at the corners of my mouth, the final thread of my old, desperate need for their approval snapping at last. Maybe I said my voice calm, my gaze steady, but at least I'll be free. I turned on my heel, my footsteps sharp and deliberate as I strode back to my car, the gravel crunching beneath my heels, the cool lake breeze brushing against my skin like a whispered promise of freedom. Susan followed her own steps, quick and precise, her face a carefully composed mask of professional detachment. As I reached my car, I paused, my hand on the door handle, the cool metal a comforting, steady presence beneath my fingers. I glanced back at the cottage, at the small, weathered house that had once been a symbol of family, of belonging, of home. Not anymore. I climbed into my car, the leather seat cool against my back, the engine roaring to life beneath me as I pulled out of the driveway without a backward glance. As I drove away, the cottage growing smaller in my rearview mirror, I felt the final heavy weight of my past slip from my shoulders, the last fragile thread of my old life breaking at last. I was free. Story 2. You've finished your role. Leave this place. My thoughts went blank as soon as I heard those words. I was met with an empty room when I got home from work. The days I had spent establishing my life there were completely gone. "We need a larger room because Howell and I will be living together. Your room will serve as our bedroom." Like every day that day. I worked extra and arrived home late. I just made it back to the house via car. I thought I could finally unwind, but as soon as I entered my room, I froze. The door was partially open. Everything was gone when I entered the bed, bookshelves, and closet. Any indication that I had ever been there seemed to have been totally removed. My mom looked at me and smiled slightly as she watched TV in the living room. "I removed all you owned." I gazed at my mother as I stood there. "What are you saying?" I sounded so weak. She seemed to hear it fine, yet it almost disappeared. "We need a larger room because Howell and I will be living together. Your room will serve as our bedroom." As though I had never truly belonged there in the first place, she stated it in a natural way. I repeated my question. "You made all of these decisions without consulting me at all, not even taking your eyes off the television." Calmly, she answered. "I take it that you no longer require it. Your role is over. Leave this place." I had the impression that something heavy and chilly had just been dropped into my heart. It was the day following my completion of Crystal's tuition payments at the university. To this point, how much had I given and exhausted myself, I understand. I didn't even inquire where my belongings were. That was all I said. I moved in the direction of the front entrance. All that was left in the hallway was my father's memorial photo, which I once looked at when I opened the door. I was surrounded by the night's quiet and moist air. With that one notion, I had to leave that house. My phone vibrated as soon as I made my first step. "Crystal," the screen stated. I hesitated for a second, but the timing was too good. Her happy voice echoed as I responded. "Big sister, what just transpired will astound you." I inhaled deeply before responding in a composed tone. "What is it? I was chosen as an exceptional student and I will receive a scholarship. Isn't that incredible?" I nearly burst into tears. The news was absolutely fantastic. With all my heart, I was proud of her. I had the impression that my time and encouragement had not been in vain. But not just that. Hearing it at this moment had a bitterly ironic quality. That's fantastic. Really, I made an effort to sound natural, but my voice faltered a bit. Big sister, has something taken place? Yes, I just got out of the house, actually. I doubt that I will return. What? There was silence on the other end of the line. I briefly explained the situation. The fact that my room had been given away without my consent. The fact that my mother said your role is over. And the fact that I was now standing there with nowhere to go. Crystal was silent for a while. After a long pause, she finally spoke in a strained voice. That's awful. I can't believe it. But it's okay now. I don't want to stay in that house anymore. Not if it means wearing myself down. Congratulations on the scholarship. You really worked hard, sis. I want to live with you. From now on, it's my turn to help. I don't want you to be alone. Her words nearly brought me to tears. I had always thought of her as a child who didn't understand anything, that it was only natural for her to be spoiled and that I had to be the one to support her. But without realizing it, she had started to grow up too. I haven't contacted them yet, but I'm thinking of going to Dad's parents' place, Grandpa and Grandma's house. Wait, I barely even know them. I agree. The last time I saw them was at Dad's funeral. We haven't kept in touch at all, so I don't know what things are like now, but I think Grandpa and Grandma would take me in at the very least. They're not like Mom. I'll go too. I want to go. Crystal's voice was full of determination. It might have been the first time I'd ever heard her speak like that. I looked up at the sky. Then I'll come get you tomorrow. Start packing your things. Okay, I will. Those words made my chest tighten. After hanging up the phone, I took a deep breath. The air I exhaled melted into the quiet of the night. I began to walk, not to fulfill someone else's role, but to reclaim my own life. That night, I stayed in a nearby budget hotel. I couldn't think about anything. I just collapsed onto the bed. Luckily, I had the next day off from work. Since I couldn't sleep right away, I started to think about the past. My father passed away when I was 24. It was a heart attack so sudden and so abrupt that I couldn't absorb any of it. Still, time passed on, and life began with only my mother, Crystal, and myself. I worked as a financial analyst. My days were packed with figures and market pressure. Not easy, but the revenue was constant. My mother worked part-time, but her wages were small and couldn't meet our living needs. She always said, "You're the only one I can rely on." Every time she said it, something inside me informed me. I have to support them. If I didn't, I couldn't be a suitable replacement for Dad. That's how I naturally came to burden the home, financially calm my mother's mental condition, and assist Crystal through high school so she could focus on her future. Crystal is 7 years younger than me. Ever since she was tiny, I had been the one holding her hand. When our parents battled and she sobbed, I'd bring her to the adjacent park and push her on the swing to quiet her down. Back then, she always clung to my sleeve, shouting, "Sis, sis." Additionally, she was so cute that I felt compelled to look after her throughout mealtimes. After bathing, I showed her how to use a spoon. At night, I dried her hair. Despite the stressful atmosphere in the house, I fell asleep next to her and read picture books to her. I was saved by the sight of Crystal's grin. My heart tightened as if I were seeing the maturation of my own child when I first saw her wearing a school backpack. I felt more like a tiny mother who was desperate to keep her safe than a sister. Crystal was immediately loved by others since she was upbeat and gregarious. Her mother loved her and lavished her with affection. As soon as she started high school, Mother insisted that Crystal was still a child. I gave her about everything she requested and let her have fun. A mobile phone, journeys, concert tickets. I used my money to cover the majority of those. I, on the other hand, never traveled. Oh no, name brand products. She gave the family almost everything, each and every paycheck. I paid for Mother's expenditures, the home payments, and even Crystal's living expenses and schooling. I also never voiced any complaints. Almost the course of 2 years, I spent almost $30,000 on Crystal's college expenditures. Mother didn't express thanks. Instead, she pretended that it was only expected, even though it was late when I arrived home. She was in front of the television giggling. I wasn't considered a daughter at home. I received manager-level treatment, someone in charge of controlling the finances and emotions. I was able to connect with the family in this way, by obligation, not by affection. But I was at my breaking point. But I didn't want Crystal to be overly affected by our father's passing. I had decided to wait till she graduated at the very least. Mother began bringing a man called Howell into the family at that time. She first claimed that they were only eating dinner together. His visits, however, increased in frequency over time. Before I knew it, he was relaxing as if it were his own house, and he and his mother were secretly getting ready to move in together. Howell was never one of my favorites. He spoke in a condescending manner as if he denigrated other people. He always seemed to be attempting to entice us into his mother's world. And I simply couldn't take it any longer. However, his mother fell deeply in love with him. Her demeanor softened whenever he was mentioned in conversation, and she would hardly pay attention to what I had to say. I felt even more alone after that transition. And ultimately, I was evicted from the residence much more quickly and simply than I had anticipated. I must have slept off while contemplating all of it. The next day, Crystal and I stood at the front entrance of our grandparents' house. My chest constricted. Years have passed since my last visit. My father was still alive the last time I visited. It was the summer following my graduation from college. We had gone together. As I sat next to him, feeling a little bashful, I recalled how truly delighted he was to see his parents again. The day of my father's burial was the next time I visited my grandparents. Almost immediately after ringing the doorbell, I heard footsteps. My granddad emerged when the door opened. Aurora. His eyes grew wide before softening into a kind grin. "Hello, grandfather. A long time has passed. Crystal is also with you. What's happening? Enter, enter. It's chilly outside." Grandma rushed out of the living room and gave us a hug. I wanted to cry as I felt her warm arms. It's been a long time. I'm so happy you two arrived. After being shown to the living area, we were given steaming tea. We were surrounded by the comforting smell of old carpet and furniture. An old family portrait of my father when he was younger was hanging on the wall. It was both nostalgic and aloof. Even before we told them everything, our grandparents were really delighted to meet us. Their eyes appeared to comprehend already. "You must have endured a great deal. If you don't want to, you don't have to discuss it. However, this is your house. You don't have to keep those words to yourself." At last, something that had been tightly wound inside of me came loose. Thank you very much." With tears in her eyes, Crystal bowed her head repeatedly as well. The days that followed seemed nearly tranquil, as if the life we had previously led had been a deception. "Spending time like this really calms the heart," Grandpa said as he tended to the garden, and Grandma made a warm breakfast every morning. Crystal started a part-time job at a local cafe on the weekends, helped out around the house in the evenings, and attended university during the day. She had changed. After being pampered by our mother and taking my help for granted, the sister was now taking on some of the responsibility herself. I felt a little proud and quietly surprised. We were having tea with our grandparents one evening after supper when Grandma abruptly brought up a topic. "It has to do with your father's inheritance, by the way. We were also given a formal notice. However, your mother informed us that both of you had forfeited your portion. Thus, we were convinced. Sacrificing our portion." I didn't mean to raise my voice. Crystal put down her teacup as well. Nothing about that was ever disclosed to us. We didn't agree to give up the inheritance, let alone even know it existed. I understand. I believed so. Grandpa sighed a little. It felt strange. Your father was adored by both of you. That you wouldn't want anything from him astounded me. However, we took your mother at her word. I asked my grandparents right away if they still had the old documents. A copy of the inheritance waiver agreement was among the many old documents they took out of the storage room. It had crystals and my name as well as strange signatures. This is entirely fake. This document has never been seen before." I pushed the words out. Both grandparents became quiet. No one said anything for a while. Unforgivable. It was Crystal's voice, generally sweet and pleasant. Now, stiff with rage, she put everything upon you, did everything she wanted, and now even grabbed Dad's fortune. That's not family. I bit my lip. Deep down, maybe a part of me had still wanted to believe in her. But this was the ultimate blow. She had taken advantage of our father's death. I will take legal action. When I spoke the words, my voice sounded remarkably calm and clear. She stole her father's fortune. Our signatures were faked by her. I'll make everything clear. Despite their startled expression, our grandparents gave a firm nod. I'll assist if Aurora requests that. But we can. I'll fight with you, Crystal murmured, holding my hand. I couldn't sleep that night, so I laid in bed in the quiet room. If I paid close attention, I could hear a clock ticking away in the distance, subtly signaling the passing of time. Gazing at the ceiling in blankness, I thought back on my life thus far. Taking a look back, for the sake of someone else, I had always been repressing something, muting my own wants. I made an effort to think that it was appropriate to suppress my feelings and give up what I want, that it strengthened me. However, I could have been mistaken. I've finally come to a realization. Choosing to advocate for myself is okay. And it's not selfish at all to make that decision. It was a wise choice to come to this house. There are folks here who are always there for us and who make us feel warm in ways that words cannot express. And for that reason, I took action. I got up the following morning and started moving right away. I went to a lawyer's office initially. I took a seat in front of the female attorney I had scheduled a consultation with. Breathing deeply, he started to describe everything. 5 years ago, my father died. My mother soon said that we had forfeited our inheritance rights, but neither my sister nor I ever made such a statement. They were fake signatures. As she made notes, the lawyer nodded. Then she calmly inquired, "Do you have a copy of the documents?" As she glanced up at me. From my backpack, I took out the copy of the waiver that we had discovered at my grandparents' place. Her expression hardened the moment she saw it. This is the handwriting and date format. They're all wary. The likelihood that this will be determined to be a counterfeit is substantial if we submit it for handwriting analysis. I gave a quiet nod. Both civil and criminal proceedings may result from what you're stating. To reclaim the unfairly acquired assets and seek a reevaluation of the bequest, we first bring a legal complaint. We can also take into consideration filing a criminal case for document falsification and manipulation of private records, given that the signatures were probably faked. I became aware of my increased calmness while I listened. The anguish and the rage were over. Right now, the only thing driving me on was my belief that I had to find a solution to this. Please, I want it all to be revealed, to continue. I obtained the required paperwork, a copy of my father's death certificate, and a family register from that era. In addition, my grandparents assisted by confirming the existence of a will. They discovered several letters and notes, but no formal will. During his lifetime, my father wrote, among them was a message. I want my daughters to lead happy lives on their own. I laid out the gathered evidence on my grandparents' living room table that evening. Sitting quietly next to me, Crystal reviewed all the things I was unaware of. I was unaware of how much you were burdened with. I decided to handle it myself. I want to finish it now, though. I don't want anyone else to ruin our life or Dad's memories any longer. That night, Crystal's profile didn't like the younger sister I knew. She no longer wanted to be protected. Instead, she wanted to assume responsibility. The attorney got in touch with me a few days later to let me know the case had been submitted. The civil suit was started, and the complaint had been formally sent to our mother. We were surprised to hear nothing from her. No sobbing, no apologies, no irate calls. Just total quiet. Calmly, I took it. I finally got it. She had always viewed us as things to be controlled rather than as family. I had taken a brief leave of absence from my job at the time. To be honest, I wasn't in the appropriate frame of mind to concentrate, and this legal struggle seemed like a life reset. Day by day, I started to gradually regain my identity as I proceeded to get ready for the case. The aroma of the coffee Grandpa poured in the morning, the time spent in the garden with Grandma gathering tomatoes, and the innumerable unsuccessful dinners Crystal attempted to prepare. The life I had known, one motivated by duty to live, felt entirely different from all of this. I was sitting by myself in the peaceful living room one evening after Grandpa and Grandma had gone to bed when I noticed a picture of my father's body. Was this the proper course of action? In my mind, the words I spoke slowly dissipated into the space. I was certain that it was proper to sue my mother. However, there was still reluctance simmering silently in the back of the mind. Was bringing your own family to court really acceptable? I quietly asked my father for an answer as I gazed into his gentle eyes in the picture. Okay, Dad, what would you have done, caught between what I still doubted and what is right? I just sat there and relied on my recollection of him. The truth would soon be exposed in a court of law. But retaliation wasn't the point. It wasn't about hurting people or severing connections with the past. It was just about reclaiming my own life. On the day of the trial, I had finally arrived at the starting line. I inhaled deeply before entering the courtroom. Even though it was my first time in such a place, my legs didn't shake in the chilly, tense air. My lawyer was at my side. My grandparents were seated in Crystal behind us. There was an inner strength that came from knowing that someone was keeping an eye on me. After a few minutes, my mom came into the courtroom. Despite her ostentatious clothing, she had a light complexion. She averted her gaze as soon as our eyes locked. The proceedings proceeded at a steady pace. The attorney showed us the handwriting analysis of the faked inheritance waiver document, which we had never seen before. Then there was the fact that my mother had taken all of my father's possessions by herself and was unable to justify her actions. She had managed family property improperly. These facts were presented by the lawyer in a straightforward but accurate manner. In an attempt to defend her, my mother's attorney said that the waiver needed to be handled promptly because of family misunderstanding. However, his statements lacked power. "Did your girls know about this process?" the judge inquired. "We weren't," I said plainly. "My sister and I have never laid eyes on that paper. They were fake signatures." "How do you feel about the inheritance as you stand here today?" the judge inquired. I spoke gently after carefully selecting my words. My father dedicated his entire life to ensuring that we could live in peace. That objective shouldn't be perverted for the convenience of another person. That's all. My mother abruptly got to her feet at that point. After he passed away, I was trying my hardest. What was I meant to do by myself? No one responded as her words reverberated across the courtroom. She complied with the judge's kind request to sit. As a witness, I closed my eyes and let out a slow breath. Crystal stood up. I took for granted my sister's sacrifices for our family, which I witnessed firsthand. However, I never heard of such waiver document at all, even though I was shaking. As the hearing came to a close, Crystal spoke while looking directly ahead. The verdict was declared. It is acknowledged that the defendant in this instance engaged in document fabrication and unjust enrichment. The plaintiff's compensation and the return of the inherited property are mandated by the court. I think I felt the strain in my back release at that same instant. My mother sat still, staring down, her face hidden. No one remained by her side. That concept never occurred to me, so I didn't feel like I had won. Only a faint feeling that it was at last over pervaded the air. I nodded slightly as I turned to face my grandparents and Crystal. With the warmth of my grandparents' love behind me, I decided to live alone when the trial was over. I made the decision to stand on my own 2 feet. I was at last able to utilize my time and money for myself, since I was no longer required to provide for my mother. There were still a lot of unfamiliar things in life, and some evenings seemed a little isolating. Nevertheless, little things made me happy. I enjoyed setting a little plant in the room while sipping tea from a cup. I didn't need to show consideration for others. I couldn't take on anyone's burdens. I was the only one in this space. I was there. I had finally started to take back my life. Additionally, Crystal was pursuing her own goals while juggling part-time employment and education. There was no longer the sister who had depended on our mother. She was replaced with someone who listened while I discussed work and inquired about our grandparents' health at breakfast. After being on leave for a few months, I came back to work. As always, my supervisor and colleagues greeted me with great emotion when I returned. I wasn't laboring to the point of exhaustion this time. I was finally beginning to realize that I was living for myself now. However, that did not imply that my heart was fully restored. I've heard my mother continued to tell relatives things like, "My daughters betrayed me," or "They abandoned their family to her," even after we severed our relationship. As the daughter, I had always been expected to provide for her. I became a traitor the moment I stopped playing that role. Still, I drew a line to reclaim my life. Cutting off my mother wasn't a sin, it was survival. Had I kept enduring, I would have shattered. Yet some nights, in the silence, I still wonder if it was the right choice. Sometimes, guilt sneaks in, making me wonder whether I abandoned my family. A part of me that loved her still exists. Furthermore, those recollections haven't entirely vanished. Family is more than simply blood. If remaining together simply makes things worse, then leaving is also a strategy to defend yourself. My grandma whispered those words to me, and they made me feel at ease. A relative called one day and said, "I saw your mom at the grocery store the other day. She appeared quite skinny. She seems to find living alone difficult." Evidently, she had quit her job and Howell had abandoned her. She was now living in an old apartment chasing debt and had no one to assist her. I had no sympathy, no rage. Perhaps my mother's only way to feel good about herself was to exert control over other people. Perhaps she was afraid of standing alone, which is why she forced me to take on the role of family. But if I tried to save her, I would never be able to go back to that world. I would only be used once more. I had made a self-promise to never do it again. We all got together for dinner at my grandparents' place that weekend. Crystal raised her voice as they were eating. "Hello, sister. I believe I want to work as a psychologist once I finish from college. Being able to remain near to people's hearts is what I aspire to." I grinned. "That's a fantastic concept, in my opinion. You'd do it well." Crystal gave a timid little chuckle. "I think the only reason I'm who I am now is because you were there for me," Ben said gently. Something in the depths of my heart was warmed by her words. I hadn't made the incorrect choice. I had created space for this peaceful, gentle life by severing my connections to the past. We could never have found what we had here. In a life of sacrifice and dominance, in a loving and equitable relationship. I murmured quietly as I took up my father's framed picture. "I've at last discovered a place I can call Family, Dad. Thank you. I am aware that you were always keeping an eye on us. This is the future. I have chosen a life that is mine, free from exploitation or sacrifice on the part of others." Finally, this is where it starts.